Welcome to the Detailer's Dock, anchoring you in the world of marine detailing. Whether you're a seasoned detailer or just starting out, this is where every detail matters, with your host, Captain Ken Mercer from Marine Detail Supply Company.
Hey y'all, welcome to the next episode of the Detailer's Dock. And today we are lucky enough to have the man, the myth, the legend, Rich from Buff and Shine. This guy is literally the man that has been behind a lot of the pads that you guys and gals out there simply use within your business, whether it's in the marine world or the automotive world. We're going to kind of go through and kind of pick his brain a little bit. So stay tuned on this one. But, with that, Rich, if you wouldn't mind, kind of share everyone who you are, where you guys are located at, and then kind of touch base on how you got started.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Rich Umbrell. I've been in business like 35 years making buffing pads. I started out basically in my parents' garage making pads. My parents had a company that made car wash chemicals. I used to ride with my dad in the route truck all the time when I was like 12 years old, all the way up to like 18. And then at 18, he said, basically like, you should start your own business because it's the only way to make money. And I was like 18, didn't know anything. And he's like, I don't think buffing pads are very good. They sold buffing pads. And he said he thought you could make better products. And so like that started it all off. 18, graduated high school, didn't go to college. But I had a very mechanical background working with my dad. And so I learned a lot of stuff, can learn how to weld and learn how to, do electrical. And so with buffing pads, a lot of the equipment is not something you should just buy. You can't go on Amazon and buy a buffing pad machine.
Well, I didn't think they didn't have
sorry?
Amazon. They didn't have Amazon around when you were 18 anyways, did they, Rich?
No. And cell phones basically started, like there was no technology like now. So it's great, but things have really advanced. But anyway, it just started out like that. And one pad led to another. And it was always about quality, trying to make stuff that would last because that's what the detailers want. They want quality. If you're buffing all day, you don't want a pad that blows up. You want to have good materials. So with that, it takes a lot of time and research and testing and trying adhesives, trying raw materials and trying to find materials for buffing pads sometimes can be difficult because there aren't companies that just produce raw materials too much for buffing pads. So you have to go to other industries and you have to dig and dig and dig and look for adhesives, look for raw materials to build a good product. And that's been the success of our company, has been always trying to make it better, always trying to make, listen to your customer, see what they say, because they'll tell you, hey, this doesn't work, this works good, we like that. So you learn how to, which direction to go. But, started out 18, worked really, really hard, didn't make any money for about 5 years. But eventually it bloomed, So now we're in Southern California. We've always been in California, which is a tough state to manufacture in. But we have beautiful weather and great lifestyle here, so we really like it. But we have about 50 people in our factory. We have a lot of automation. That's one thing that we've really gotten into lately is, labor costs are high in the U.S.
Right.
So we have a lot of robots. We have a lot of automated things. And we have a lot of machines that I've built myself, which is something that I've learned to do over the years, like starting out at 18, there's no buffing pad machine. So I have a lot of things, and we don't usually let anyone into our factory because of that, because it's things that I've spent, decades of, 35 years of doing this. I've learned a lot. I can make a lot of equipment myself and speed things up and, just get the cost down basically and make a good product. So that's what's kept us in business all these years.
Let's kind of like step back a little bit, like when you were 18. So what was like the first pad that you remember making, or what was it for? No, what was it? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Of course I do. Of course I do. That's my, that's the first one you do is like, it's like your first girlfriend, right? You remember her, right?
Oh yeah.
So, back when I started, everything was just twisted wool and it was bolt on basically, and it was curved, and flat pads were in rotary were kind of like phasing out. And there was the very start of Velcro wool, twisted wool pads. There was not really any foam in the market. And that was it. It was like you had cutting wool and finishing wool, and most cars, like people would finish the whole car with wool, just do cutting wool, finishing wool, and that was it, no foam.
Right.
And then the paint started changing, things started changing. So those pads, the paints changed. So they start leaving swirl marks and causing problems, and people start to hate wool pads. But it's not really the pad. It's more of the technology. The paint's changed and can't use the same things anymore. So you got to evolve and make new products that work on the paints that are out there. So yeah, I do remember those. We still make those, and they're still used in a lot of like industrial applications where they will buff all day long, and they never change the pad because they just need one wool, and they just buff till the pad's gone. So we still make them.
What when did foam started kind of like make its transition into the world? For pad wise, do you remember?
I'd say that in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a little bit of foam, but it was like terrible foam because it would rip and shred, and and everything was rotary then still. So with rotary, if you hit something, with seat cushion foam, it just blows up, and people thought it was weird. They'd overheat it, and then the foams got better little by little. They've gotten better, and looking back today, I mean, the foams we have today are way, way better than the foams we originally started out with back in the early 90s. But it took a long time for it to catch on. And I think that's because the foam just, they were just grabbing seat cushion foam basically and trying to buff with it, and then just wasn't strong enough. So the difference between today's foams and those foams is huge.
So let's kind of like talk about that a little bit. Like, I think a lot of people out there really don't know or understand like really what foam is and the material. Yeah, they hear the word foam, but correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, like foam is a form of plastic. Is that correct? Or part of plastic?
Well, yeah, it is plastic in a sense. So it has limitations. Heat limitations are the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
It is a mixture of chemicals that they put together. There's a list of specs, like 8 to 10 specs that you can have on foam, and you can tinker with those specs. But if you change some of the specs, to get one benefit, you might lose another one. So you have to kind of balance out the specs so that you can get a product that's functional. Because if you make the foam too hard, the foam can get more brittle. If you make the foam soft, it'll get more stretchy, but then it won't have the firmness that you want. So there's a lot to it. There's different technologies of foam out there that are, some companies make only one type, another company makes another type. There's some that are now somewhat focused on buffing pads as a category for foam. When I first started, there was no companies making any foams for buffing pads. And then it took a long time for them to even realize the market and recognize, well, hey, maybe we should make some foam that's specific for this market. So nowadays we have more of those companies interested, which gives us better products. But yeah, it is a plastic, and I'd say the biggest negative with it is controlling your heat when you're polishing so that you don't overheat it. Like I've said before, it's think of it as like a car, redlining your engine. Like you can only run it up in the red for so long, and then the engine blows, right? So same thing with a buffing pad. Is the way to really gauge it is, time, machine speed, pressure down. All those things create more heat, friction. Even your backing plate can create friction on the Velcro as it runs back and forth. If your hooks on your Velcro backing plate are worn, they will rub on the loop and shred it, and you'll think, hey, this pad's no good, but it's actually your backing plate that you haven't changed for 5 years.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of little things, but yeah, foam is great though, because it can do a lot for you if you use it right. And it's just getting educated on, like what are the limits of this product. But if you stay within those limits, you can get great results, and you can make your pads last longer and save money is really what the detailers need to be looking at.
Right. So I hear a lot of like differences, or not differences, like some people say closed foam or open foam cell. Like, what's the difference between that?
Well, most foam, when it's made, the cells are closed to a certain degree, not 100%, but let's say 70%, 80% of the cells are closed. So you can take foam and put it through another process where you open the cells up. And then when you open them up, you get the benefits of airflow. So that's good because you get cooling. If you make cells too big, it swallows all the compound that you're using. So then your pad gets too heavy and your pad machine starts shaking, and you don't, an inexperienced guy wouldn't understand, hey, why is my machine shaking? He thinks something's wrong with the pad, but he's got a quart of compound in it. Then closed celled is, it'll keep the compound or polish, whatever you're using, down on the surface, but it can't handle a lot of heat. So if you get it too hot, because there's no airflow, the foam will have a shorter life. And so we mostly have open celled foams in our line. We have a couple of closed cells, but you really got to be careful with those. I mean, closed cells, if you have a smaller machine with a short stroke and you keep the speed down, the closed celled stuff won't heat up as much.
Right.
But I would recommend 9 times out of 10, even almost 10 times out of 10, to use open celled foam. But if you keep the cell size down on open cell, you can keep more of the polish on the panel that you're buffing rather than sucking it up into the pad.
Right.
So open celled, smaller cell, would keep the pad from eating so much compound.
So is there like a difference in cut between open cell and closed cell, or is it really the true advantage is more of, just the airflow? Or
I would say that, the market is mostly open cell foam. That's what people are grabbing, As far as cutting, one cut's better than another, I wouldn't say that. I would say closed celled was something that people were using, and then once they realized they overheat it, then they switched away from it. Most people that I run across don't like it. They end up with too many problems and then returns, and they just don't want to deal with that, because guys want to run fast. They want to run hot. They don't want to change pads. They don't want to rotate them. They just, want to buy one pad and do a whole car or do a whole whatever they're doing. They just don't want to switch pads.
Right.
So they'll have more trouble with those, I would say. But also, it's not all the pad too. It's a liquid you're using. You kind of have to marry them up to get the result you want. So it's not all about the pad. It's part of the.
Yeah, for sure. So, with that too, there's a lot of colors, right? So throughout your lineup, I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think your most aggressive, at least foam wise, is a maroon, right?
We have a super coarse blue, but maroon is very popular. That's right above. We have a blue that's real coarse, then we have a maroon that's our main cutting pad, which is it's more user friendly than the blue. The blue is a little bit harder, but so we have a lot of foams in our line, and you don't need all of those foams, but we supply so many different companies in so many different ways. We do private branding. We have our own brand. People come to us and hey, I want this orange foam. I want this green foam. I want this yellow foam. So we have a lot of foam. So as a detailer, you look at like the Uro-Tech line has 8 foams in it. You don't need all 8. You probably need 3, maybe 2 you can get away with. But since we do manufacture so many private brands in the market, we have customers that come to us specifically and go, I want this orange or I want this yellow. And so we have it. We just make it available. And a lot of, as you know, detailers have their own opinions on what they like. One guy, you work a trade show, one guy comes by and he loves orange, the next guy hates orange, the next guy loves yellow, next guy hates yellow. So from our side, we don't make any polish or compounds. So we kind of just want to fill the gap, whatever they're looking for, and, give them quality products. But like if I was going to go through our line of foam like Uro-Tech, I'd probably pick 2 or 3 and I could do anything. But maroon is a good one. Maroon's one of our best sellers, if you had asked about that one.
Maroon, I think blue. What's your softest foam pad that you make?
We have a really soft black, which is it's kind of a traditional black finishing pad. It's like an 80 pppi, closed cell, not closed cell, open cell foam. It's super soft. It's a great finisher. That foam you can run on rotary too. That foam's great for finishing. I mean, it's been a hit for 10, 15 years. I mean, it's great material.
So I think I heard you say PPI. What's PPI?
Well, that's just the pores per inch. Okay. Like when you buy foam has different hole sizes, right? And they control the pore size when they manufacture the foam. So you give your manufacturer specs and say, like, the range can go from like 10 to like 110, I've seen. So if you want, it's like basically like sandpaper grit, I want 36 grit or I want 80 grit. So you say what size hole you want. When they run the foam, it'll have a range of like 5 PPI or whatever, 5 pores per inch. So if I want a 70, it might come in 72, 68, something like that. It could be 70 exactly. There's just a tolerance on it. But yeah, that's what that means.
Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, there's different types of pads out there. So you have tufted wool, right? I think is one, right? If I'm saying that right. You have different style wool. There's a step below the tufted, right? There's more of a softer wool. What do you call it?
Like knitted wool?
Yeah, knitted wool, right? And then we have foam, and then we have microfiber, essentially, right?
Right.
And then I guess you could say foamed wool, or you can kind of elaborate on that, on what you know about that. But essentially, what is the difference between them all, kind of in a nutshell, kind of like clip notes wise for the users that are out there? So the tufted wool.
Well, the tufted wool is kind of like, well, let's go back further even than that. Original buffing pads were sheepskin, like right off the animal hide.
Oh, wow.
And, so that's like, the animal skin basically and they're still, those float around, but they're kind of expensive and you're killing the sheep to get the wool. So the next technology is the twisted.
Tina doesn't like that too much, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I'm not really cool with it either, but so the next thing is the twisted wool came along as, as a way to sew it in, or to tufting is a stitch that's used to make those pads.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the next step. So it was sheepskin, then the twisted wool or tufted wool. So then there's some attempts with the knitted wool to go back to the sheepskin, but not killing sheep, shaving the animal, putting in a knitting machine, and then you got knitted wool. Okay. So you've got tufted wool, then knitted wool. So those two, like the twisted wool will blow some lint because it's made of a lot of fibers that are just twisted together.
Right.
People don't like lint. The only thing
we call them woolies.
Yeah, they're fuzzy, but the only thing with that is, you can spur away some of the wool and get fresh wool. So people don't really think about that. I know it makes a mess in your shop, but with knitted wool, so if you're on a rotary with knitted wool, it'll mat up and it's hard to clean out. So once it's fully wet, the pad's saturated, you can't really like spur off the wool and get fresh wool. You have to clean the pad. So then you asked about microfiber. I mean, microfiber has been around 10, 12, 15 years now as a cutting pad. So that was like really nice because it doesn't have lint. It has drawbacks of you got to clean it constantly. So when it first came out, people looked at the hair, it's really short, and they're like, well, it loads up in a minute. And if you use too much polish, it'll load up really, really fast. So you have to clean it a lot, but you can get really good results with it, and you get no lint. So as a cutting pad, especially on paint, you have twisted wool with a rotary, or you have knitted wool with a rotary, or you have knitted wool with an orbital, or you've got microfiber as your cutting pad. Now, microfiber creates a lot more heat. Microfiber has to be cleaned a lot. So if you grab one and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to hate it because it's going to get really hot and it's going to get loaded up and you're going to make a mess. So you need to clean it. The knitted wool on the orbital, it can absorb a little bit more chemical before it loads up. Doesn't have to be cleaned quite as quick as the microfiber. Knitted wool, again, doesn't throw as much lint as the old twisted wool stuff. And so what we see like half and half. Some guys use wool for cutting on knitted wool on an orbital, and some guys are using microfiber. You go to we work a lot of trade shows, and one guy loves microfiber, the next guy hates it. Ken says, I can never make it work. But
yeah. Do you think that has to do with machine preference? Because, I hear and I see what you're saying too. Like for me, what I see the difference is, somebody's using knitted wool, and we're going to use the automotive field here, just for instance, or let's say automotive paint is, generally that's the guy or gal that's using a rotary to do their heavy cut stage, versus like, somebody that prefers the microfiber, generally using like a long throw polisher on a dual action. Generally, you're using that for the cutting stage. Do you think that, maybe that difference of opinion has to do with the type of machine that they're using with their cutting style? Or
I think you never know what people's personal preferences are until they tell you. But there is machines. I mean, you got guys that, I love this machine, I hate that machine, I like this machine, I like this compound, I like this pad, I like that, So there's a lot of things that go into it. The chemicals they use have a lot to do with it too, to get good results. So, I mean, a lot of I feel like you can make a lot of different, you can get to the end goal with a lot of different ways and get good results. You know, there may be some paths that don't work and you need to change them to get, to get to the results. But I mean, overall microfiber works if you use it right. You can get good results. I see guys get great results. We get great results. Wool does too. But again, people are using all different brands of machines, all different brands of chemicals, and you throw in their own personal opinion, and it makes it even more complicated. So we don't like to tell them what to do, but we like to give them the tools so they can choose what they want and get their job done.
Talking about temperature on pads, so like for instance, wool I believe runs the coolest on the surface. Then
Correct.
it's microfiber, then it's foam. Like foam creates the most heat. Am I right?
Well, wool doesn't create a lot of heat because it's a naturally grown fiber, and it doesn't hold the heat. You can, run it and touch it and it's not hot. You can get the panel hot, but microfiber is more of a polyester material. So it's a synthetic, so it's going to get hot. And then foam again is plastic. And then foam depends on the hole size in the foam. The bigger the pore is, the cooler the pad will run. If you have a smaller pore in the foam, pad's going to heat up faster. So with foam and microfiber, you can create a lot of heat. I see guys build more heat with microfiber too fast because they're in the cutting stage. They're kind of being aggressive. They're pressing down, is going to create more heat. So I'm kind of have an engineering mind, and so I know about pressing and stuff, and pressing and heat and pressure will transmit more heat faster with pressure. So they can build those microfiber pads up quicker to heat, I believe, because they're pressing and pushing and it's all synthetic. You got foam, usually foam behind the microfiber. So it's a whole synthetic piece basically. So I would say, in my opinion, microfiber, I could get hotter faster than foam. It also depends on how you lubricate the pad, keeping the pad, you don't want the pad too dry. So, there's a learning curve there for new guys.
So I'm glad that you talk about, lubricating the pads, because I did, I reached out to our network and let them know that you were going to be on. And that was actually one of the questions that one of our users, Zach Ranger from Southwest Florida, Marine and Auto Detailing, kind of asked. I know that your competitor builds, which is a great partner of ours, it's Lake Country. They make a pad washer, right? So what are your thoughts of utilizing a pad washer, or what is your preferred ways of cleaning pads properly?
You do need to clean your pads, because if you don't clean them, let's take different pads, but foam pads, the more compound you put on the pad or polish you put on the pad and it goes inside, it starts building up in the pad and it'll block the airflow. So that's one way to keep your pad cooler, is to keep it cleaner. So you need a way to clean it on the fly. So a couple ways to clean it is, you could use a pad washer, which is a good idea. You can use compressed air to blow the pad out a little bit. Some people don't like that. They feel like it blows it back into the pad. It does work. You can also use a brush, or if you take the pad off and get it super wet, then it's slinging water everywhere. If you take it to a sink and wring it out, but you really do need to clean the pad. I mean, that's part. If you just keep going on that pad, you're going to keep filling it with polish. It's going to get hotter, and then your pad's going to melt quick.
Yeah.
You can do it in 5 minutes. If you load it up with compound and just press on it and heat and all that, it'll destroy the pad. So, and it also, as you're working, you're getting all this contamination in your pad. You need to get rid of it. You don't want to keep smearing it all over the car. So it's definitely, having a pad washer on hand is a good idea, because it'll get all the junk out that you're taking off and give you a fresh, clean surface to work with, and keep the airflow up on your, especially on foam. So I think it's a good idea to have those.
Do you, so if a pad washer wasn't an option, right, which, it's kind of more of a newer technology or a newer item that's out there, what is your preferred way of washing foam pads? And then what's your preferred way of, washing wool pads? Do you, like, for instance, I have your double-sided wool pad here that, we're huge fans of, especially the 8x1.25. I would say for the marine world, that's the one that I recommend. I recommend, the Buff and Shine as well as the Lake Country. Both of them are phenomenal. But what is your preferred method of washing, say, a foam pad versus, maybe a wool pad like this?
Well, foam, you need to get, if you've just finished the detail and the pad's, got a lot of compound in it, I think you should wring it out in a sink. If you
Are you
if you
using
leave it
soap?
for a few, you can use something mild, something, not, you don't want to use anything too aggressive, but you could use a little bit of soap if you have something that if there's any type of pad cleaning chemical somebody sells to spray on the pad to help loosen up
Mhm.
the compound. Not a bad idea. Um, like on our pads, all of the adhesives that we use or most of the adhesives are resistant to heat. So you should be able to use warm water um, on foam, just not hot water, but warm water to maybe that might help loosen some of the dried compound. Depends, if the pad's fresh, I just finished a job and the compound's wet, it might come out real quick with
Right.
water, just water alone. But I think doing it in a sink's a okay way to do it. I see guys using pressure washers. I mean, you can do that. It might tear up the foam because the
That's what
pressure
I was about
washer's
to
got
say.
so much pressure. I mean, you can actually, take paint off if you're not careful with those. So,
Right.
it's not the best way to do it. And then when it comes to wool, wool's a little trickier to clean because wool has like spikes in the fiber. You can't really see them, but if you've ever taken like a twisted wool pad and thrown it in the washing machine and you take it out, it looks like a brick. Have you ever seen that? Maybe.
Because
Um,
I don't wash seat pads. I just budget them, and when they're no good, I toss them. That's just my personal
right,
preference. But that's why I'm kind of curious of
right.
your
So,
feelings
so
on cleaning wool pads.
with wool, I mean, a good way to clean it is when you're done is just heavily spurred out, like
Hmm.
twisted wool,
Yep.
spurred out and try to get the compound out of it. If you throw it in the washer, what happens to the wool is it, it, it does what's called felting, where it'll ball up and it'll lock up into itself because the fibers have these little spikes on them that when they get wet, they come out. So the agitation of the machine will cause the wool to knot up. And it's like everybody's wool will do that unless they have a pre-washed wool, which is quite expensive. So that the knitted wools are uh, pre-washed wools.
Hmm.
So it's like an extra step that helps the pad clean out better so it won't knot up. But the old traditional twisted wools, like the tufted type, those will knot up from pretty much any brand because the cost to do the pre-wash is quite expensive. So if you didn't do it on the knitted, if you didn't do it on the knitted wools, then there would be a lot more problems when you're polishing. So you have to do it. And the market's kind of used to the old twisted wools. The way that they do that. I mean, people are used to it, so it's not mandatory to do it
Right.
as a manufacturer because it adds a lot of cost.
Right. And you talked about spur in the pad. What are your thoughts on using compressed air on a tufted wool pad to clean it? Because, some out there will say that'll, when you're utilizing, say, something like a tornador gun or a blow gun, that essentially you could untwist that wool while you're blowing it and it could potentially affect the cut. I mean, I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
You see a lot of guys use those. It'll help. I mean, it'll help you. The wool's untwisting when you're spinning. It's going to untwist, but it is when it's twisted, it's kind of set in a sense with heat, so that
Hmm.
it helps to try to keep the twist in. It's like sort of got like a not hairspray on it, but it's got some techniques that the yarn manufacturers do to help. I suppose that if you blow too close with the air right in there, you can damage the hair. If you're touching it with the spur, you're gonna be rubbing it. You're gonna be combing it a little bit.
Hmm.
I think that the cut comes from the fiber diameter, and the twist helps keep the fibers in place.
Okay.
So if you untwist them, you still have the same fiber diameter. It's just not going to, the pad probably won't last as long because it's untwisted. Like we make some untwisted wools that have zero twist, but have same fiber diameter, and it won't last as long. So the twist is kind of keeping everything together while the machine's spinning.
Hmm.
So it helps it, and it should keep all those fibers compact compared to the untwisted wool and give you a little bit more cut. So you don't want to be blowing out the twist for sure.
Right. Right.
On purpose, you don't want to, but if you want to clean your pad and use it again, and you don't want powder flying all over the place or, dried nuggets coming out of the pad, you need a way to clean it. So, I think, when you're done spurring it is, just been the traditional way to clean the pads. Some guys use air, but Also, I think guys have a tendency to get too much chemical in the pad too.
Right.
And then they saturate them. And then, I mean, that's, then they make a mess. They have to clean up, and they probably didn't need to make that in the first place.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that. Like, what we try to, teach people that call us or educate people on is like, I think what, especially in the marine world, for instance, as you know, that's kind of our specialty. And for a marine detailer, this white wool pad is their baby, right? It's the thing they use the most to remove
Right.
oxidation and do cutting. And a real common issue that we see is people not spurring their pad often enough. I mean, we really try to educate everyone to every working section that you're doing, you need to spur the pad, because the second that pad starts loading up with compound and such like that, it starts affecting the cut, the way the surface is going to, come out
Sure.
with your end results. And like, I've been in a lot of OEMs too, and I would tell you, I bet you 90% of the OEM manufacturers that are out there finishing boats, every single time I see their pads, they're just caked up. Like, and it
Right.
takes something as simple as a few seconds just to spur your pad to A, I think it prolongs the life of the pad, and B, you're going to get the results that you're looking for. Because essentially, when you just neglect that pad, it's going to neglect its overall, performance and what you're able to deliver with the result. So
You're right.
yeah,
I agree.
on that it's extremely important. And lastly, on these wool pads too, they're steamed and unsteamed. And if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, majority of the wool pads that you offer are steamed. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So what's the difference essentially between steamed and unsteamed, and advantages and maybe potentially disadvantages?
We've never made anything unsteamed. I mean, it's just basically putting steam on the product to help balloon it up. There's claims from some people that if it's unsteamed, that it works different. It's not anything that I've ever felt that we needed to put into our line, like that this product doesn't work because it's steamed. I think it's some companies' marketing that you're looking at there, but I haven't seen, never had a customer come to me and say, I need this or that one way or the other. But I don't, what's your opinion on it?
My opinion is, like, I know that there's some that out there that say that unsteamed cuts more. I don't know if I personally experienced that. What I will tell you is the experience that I have noticed is pads that are steamed versus unsteamed have way less woolies, right? What we call, like, when you're sitting there and the pad's brand new and it sheds all over the place. That's what my personal opinion. I don't know how valid that is compared to steamed and unsteamed, but that's what I have personally experienced. And speaking of woolies too, is like our lead trainer, Cole Holbrook, actually teaches this little trick. And I would encourage a lot of you out there to use it too. If you're trying to cut down on woolies on a brand new pad, he actually takes a spray bottle, Rich, and wets his hand, right? And will run the machine on a really low super speed, that you can control, and kind of run your hand over it. And that moisture from his hand actually will pull all that excess like wool out in his hand, and he can literally kind of like set it in a pile versus it just flinging all over the place. So
Right.
I think that's such a cool little trick that a lot of people could potentially use to cut down on those woolies, because man, do they get a royal pain in the neck sometimes,
Right.
especially if you're in a confined space. You know what I mean?
Right.
Enough of kind of like wool pads. Like, there's something that's been, I think, not out there in the pad world. You and I personally have had multiple discussions about this, and it's improper use of running pads, and specifically DA pads that have essentially either a microfiber or like a foamed or a wool style, substrate with a foam interface, right?
Right.
And even foam pads. I think standard foam pads have the same issue too, is where the users out there are seeing separation. For instance, say the microfiber coming off from the foam, or the Velcro backing separating from the foam. From your personal experience, which I want you to share, like, I already know your opinion on it, but like, what do you feel is the real cause of what's causing these failures on the pads themselves?
Well, I think, there's a lot of things that can cause it in manufacturing, if the adhesives aren't right, or if the process isn't right, the way that you're assembling the product, that can be one thing. It can also be the foams itself. There's so many different foams out there and so many different formulations and custom formulations that can be made.
Right.
We're always trying to improve them to make them stronger, because you take foam and you cut it for one product and then you use it in a different product and it acts different. So let's say you have a foam you're using for buffing and it's just a foam buffing pad, and then you put it as an interface. It's a totally different application. So the foam may not work as well. Then, you might need a different foam for that. So there's a lot of specs on foam of elongation and tear and all of that. So you need the materials have to be selected right. The adhesives have to be selected right from the manufacturing side. So, and then there's limits of technology, like the adhesives we use are heat resistant, chemical resistant. So we're doing the best we can there. So now when we manufacture the product, we have to make sure that our processes are controlled and run time after time the correct way, so that we get the good bond that we want, that we're not making mistakes. So once we have that under control, then we go for, we want the best raw materials of the foam that we can get that has the most stretch for like the interface on these pads. And then it comes down to what's the life of the pad supposed to be? What's the market expectation of life cycle? My opinion is it needs to last longer than all my competitors, because that's how I am. So I always go for that's my goal. That's my goalpost. If you ask me, is like, it needs to be better. It needs to be the best I can buy. So if I can buy a better foam, I'm going to buy it. If I can buy a better microfiber, I'm going to buy it. Trying to keep the price point in line, but I'm going to make it good, the best that I can. So I'm always searching for materials. But then there's also the users and the education level of these guys, and what things they can do to make their pads last longer, like pad rotation. We've talked about not loading the pad up with too much chemical, because I can make the best pad in the world, but if it's loaded with chemical, there's no way air's getting through it, and it's just going to get hot. It doesn't matter who made it. So there's education that needs to be taught. A lot of guys, will press really, really hard down, and they feel like they got to do that to get the cut. I've talked to so many people over the years that I've probably heard everything. Some guys, you ask them, well, what speed do you run at? And they run it as fast as possible. Why? Well, it works faster. Well, it may work for a little bit, but it's not going to work forever. Like, you're going to run into problems if you're, it's redlining the car again. Yep. So education is really key, I think, because in the end, detailers got to understand there's guys like me trying to make the best product I can for them. If we're at a limit of technology with raw materials and things, in the end of the day, they want to get a good result, and they want their pads to last as long as they can so they can make money. So if they have the education to like, okay, well, we have to run these pads and be careful how we do it so we don't blow them up, then that's what they need, the education too. So everybody's trying to do, the best they can, make the best product, but education is key. I think, you'll see guys that just don't have a whole lot of experience, and they can tear pads up, and backing plates are a big one too, because guy buys a machine, never buys a backing plate. And then the way you can tell is, it's just get a brand new backing plate, put it on a brand new pad, peel it off, check it against your backing plate, see how well it peels off. And you can tell right there if your backing plate on your machine is wearing out, because the hooks on the backing plate don't last forever. They look good. You can't see them unless you get a microscope or something, or a magnifying glass to see how, like, what's going on. But they're just plastic, the little hooks. And every time you pull the Velcro pad off, those hooks, they spring. And then when the machine's running, they're just rubbing back and forth. So pretty soon the head of them will pop off and it doesn't hold. So then the more those heads pop off, the more the pad slips. So you put a brand new pad on, you could shred the loops pretty quick. And then you're creating a lot of heat and you don't know why, and your pad failed.
At the beginning, you kind of talked about swapping pads, and some people call that cycling pads too.
Right.
And I think, especially in the marine world, we see, we got big substrates. It's not like a car, right? The surface area is, 4, 5, 10, 20 times larger than a car in most instances. And what I see, and I you and I we've talked about this many times. We agree that, we see, for instance, let's take the long throw polisher into effect, right? And, since the implementation of long throw polisher, it's created a lot more correction, right? but with the faster correction comes with heat. And the common denominator that we see with people that are going through, that are shredding pads and going through pads, is prolonged use of that same pad for an extended period of time. And, like you and I spoke about earlier in the podcast, that, foam heats up, and a lot of times these pads are, foam interfaced, or they're foam pads, period. So it starts creating a lot of heat, right? And that extended period of time of heat will degrade the foam. It'll also start to affect the glue that's in there. And it's not that the raw materials are inferior. It's the prolonged amount of heat, pressure, and time that somebody's using that. So, for instance, if you have a 25-foot hull boat, just a bay boat, for instance, a good best practice simply out there is to have, if you're using your finishing pad on a dual action long throw polisher, you probably should at least budget yourself 4 pads on that hull. That way you're cycling that pad. It's not going through an extended period time of heat. When they're out there and they're wondering why their foam is coming apart, or their wool's come separating from the foam, and they look at the pad, and you and I talked about it, right? It's kind of like wavy, right? Or they can see how it pulled apart. And a lot of times, like it'll kind of separate a little bit more towards that center. And that center is where all that pressure is being put, and that heat is concentrated on.
Right.
Long story short, for those of you out there listening, like if you're seeing your pads and you're blowing through pads, I would really just dial it back and kind of look at technique. Are you pushing too hard? Are you running too fast? Or, are you running that pad for too long? Give it time to cool down. And, to a shout out to Lake Country, that pad washer for me, like if you're utilizing that pad washer, you're injecting cold water into that foam, essentially cooling down that pad at the same time and prolonging the life of those pads, where, you're using 2 pads on a boat and you only get 1 boat out of it, where you can use 4 or 5 pads and cycle it and get 6 boats out of the same pads. If you're cleaning them and maintenance them the right way, you're not overheating them where the foam gets cracked, the wool or whatever it is, isn't getting damaged. And then lastly, people rubbing up on stuff, right? So they're running like on boats specifically, maybe not on cars as much, but like the edge, say they start bumping into a cleat or a rod holder and it rips the side of the foam, right? Well, once you start a little bit of a tear, that, it's just going to continue to tear more. You know what I mean?
It just keeps going.
Yeah. For me, like I'm real passionate about it. I think you guys, Lake Country Rupes, which are to me are like the top tier pad manufacturers, period. So like anybody out there listening, like those are the pads that we recommend. Buff and Shine, Lake Country, Rupes, like you all, it's funny, right? You all make pads just like that, and you all have that same issue, right? So is it the manufacturer or is it the user? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I've seen it time and time again where somebody has had a Buff and Shine pad, Lake Country pad, and Rupes pad, all kind of similar, because you guys make some similar units, and they all have the same problem. Sometimes we need to look ourselves in the mirror out there, detailers, like, let's make sure that we're taking care of our equipment. Let's not necessarily blame the manufacturer when it gets to that. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Right.
I know you and I have talked about it, but here's your chance to publicly go on.
Right. Well, I think if I was a detailer and, I'm doing this for a living and that's, my business and I'm buffing every day, I think I'd invest in more pads, and they'll last longer if you just rotate them. So there's a financial reason to do it.
Yeah.
It's hard to motivate people, and money motivates people.
Yeah.
There's your motivation right there is, like you just said, if I buy 2 pads and do the boat and throw them away, but if I bought 6 pads and did that boat, I'd still have all 6 pads probably for the next boat and the next boat. And in the end, 2 months, I would have, bought less pads and, got better finishes and not thrown as many pads away.
Yeah.
So they, I think that's the biggest thing there is just pad rotation, pad cycling.
Yep.
And, have it as part of your business plan so that, if you spend less money on pads, you're putting more money in your pocket basically as a detailer.
Yeah. 100%.
But but also investing a little bit in education so they learn how to not run into things and how to save their pads. Because there's all kinds of obstacles on everything you're buffing, and can blow a pad in 1 second on a cleat.
Oh, trust me, personal experience. Just they can shred in seconds. Especially if you hit it just right at the right speed. I mean, it's
Right.
the metal's gonna win against foam every day of the week, bud.
Yeah.
When they
Yeah.
go head to head with each other on that. But lastly, to finish on that side, like if you're going to tell somebody to swap a pad or cycle a pad, on average, if you're going to talk time, what kind of window would you suggest? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour?
No, I mean, I think it has to do with how much heat you're creating, because heat's the enemy with foam, or with, all pads in general that have a foam interface in them. A car is going to be a little different than a boat. Boats are bigger. So with boats, I think you got to go by time. With cars, a lot of people say swap on every panel, or a quarter of the car, do quarter of the car, swap the pad, do another quarter of the car, swap the pad. A boat, I think you got to come up with a time, how much time you're buffing, because there's all different size boats. I mean, you could have a 50-foot boat and a 20-foot boat, and I can't say cut it in quarters, but I would say time depends on how hot it's getting and what you're doing. So I think you got to figure out, if I'm heating this pad up in 5 minutes, I might need to change it. If I'm heating it up in 10 minutes, then I'll change it. So I think that's how you got to go about it, is just kind of monitor your heat. And once you all these pads heat up at different levels. So you kind of got to choose the pads you like, and then figure out the heat limits of them. Because the foam holds heat. If you had a foam pad without the center hole in it, it would heat up faster. So the center hole actually helps dissipate some of the heat and keep the pad in better shape longer. But I would say, you really got to figure out the pads you're using, because some of our pads have bigger cells in them, and some have smaller cells. Smaller cell foam's going to get hot faster. Bigger cell foam's going to last longer without having to pull it off. So, and then, also cleaning your pad will keep your pad cool. Like you said, throw it in the pad washer, cool the foam down a little bit, and go right back to work. Probably there's a lot of variables there to consider when you're to keep the heat down. So that's my answer, really.
Yeah, no, and I like it. So, I'm going to ask you, something that, we've kind of talked about on each and every podcast. Generally, I ask detailers this question, but before I ask you this question, I'm going to kind of touch base on one of the pads that you particularly make that for me is near and dear to my heart. I'm a big fan of it, is the all black microfiber pad that you make. Okay. And by the way, like this new packaging, Rich, whoever came up with it, you guys crushed it. I mean, I really like this little window that's in here now. That kind of makes it look like it. You can actually see for those of you watching, you can actually see the pad through it, instead of printing on a color. You just let the color of the pad speak for itself through the bag, which I think is great. But the reason why I like this pad so much, I've talked about it. I've made many videos. Again, you don't pay me to say this. This is my favorite pad to apply any type of polymer or cream-based sealant with, believe it or not. And a lot of it has to do with what you talked about earlier in the podcast, is, how foam itself can kind of load up and absorb. In this instance, we're going to say the polish, right? Or not polish, but the sealant. It'll kind of absorb it, make it, off balance, a little heavier. And what I've noticed with the all black microfiber pad is I'm able to use less sealant. Essentially I'm eliminating waste, because I'll put like 4 pea-sized dots, and because of how the microfiber is, it's not really absorbing all the way through, and it spreads a lot easier, on the surface.
Okay.
The other thing too is, microfiber, some people will go, oh man, it's a cutting pad. It's going to cut. Well, what most people don't know is if there's no abrasive attached with the microfiber itself, it won't cut. Where the cutting comes from is like when you add an abrasive, essentially it could almost 2x your abrasive. But when you're using a sealant, there's no abrasive. It's just like wiping a microfiber towel on the side of your boat, essentially.
Right.
Huge fan of this pad. Like those of you listening, like if you're not using it to apply cream-based sealant, you're missing out. You'll notice that you'll use less product. your sealant will work better because most of these modern day sealants are better when it's spread thinner than thicker. All thicker's going to do is make it more pain in you know what to wipe it off. And then for the car guys and gals out there, you also make this other pad, the salt and pepper pad, what I like to call it, or some call it the Oreo.
Right. Oreo. Yeah.
Right. Which is like the world's best one-step pad. I'm sorry. Like if you guys and gals out there are trying to one-step car paint, this is going to cut and finish in one. I'm a huge fan. Who came up with this one? Because this is excellent.
So I design all the pads. I mean, they're all designed by me, developed by me. That pad sells like crazy. That is the hot pad for us. That pad, we're constantly making that pad, that salt and pepper one. It just, constantly. That thing hums. I mean, that thing's so popular.
Oh,
it's in our top 5 pads in sales.
So what's your number one then? So here's my question. I like it. So
Can't
normally
tell you that.
you got to give me a little bit. So here's why. So I'm going to lead into that question. So that question we normally ask is, what is our top 5 favorite pads? However, that can't be fair to you because you're an automotive and marine guy or industrial. You're a pad guy, period.
Right.
So what is Rich's top 5 pads?
I would say from orbital side, definitely that black and white salt and pepper pads, the maroon foam pad that we have. That's our go-to for the cutting pad.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the black finishing pad is really good, really good seller in the orbitals, like the CR or the edge guard line. We have it in that. For the wool, we have a white wool that has our blueberry foam on the back, which is selling really well. It's like a heavy, it's knitted wool. It's a heavier cut. It's got we make it in a 1/2 inch pile and a 3/4 inch pile. Has a blueberry 1/2 inch foam interface. That one's gotten really popular for us. The 1/2 inch pile is really set up for the 21 millimeter machine because that machine, if the pad's too heavy, it'll shake. So you have to make sure that your pad's not too heavy. But we also make it in a 3/4 inch pile, and that's for that you can use on a gear driven machine. It's got a shorter stroke. You can get away with it on a 15. It's a little bit long for 15, the pile. But it's more made for a rotary basically because the pile's 3/4 inch long. But that pad's picked up a lot of traction because there's really no lint. It's got a thick pile on it. So a lot of the orbital pads, the manufacturers don't put a lot of wool on the front of the pad. Because wool's expensive. So but modern detailers don't want to use twisted wool. They don't want to use rotary. They want to use orbital. So we're trying to give them like a heavy cut pad, where they can be aggressive with it and get it, good cutting power. So we've got super thick wool. So that one would be one of my better sellers and a pad that I like. I think it's like, the heavy cut. It's cool. No lint. And we've got 2 styles, like I said, 3/4 and 1/2 inch. But and then in the rotary, we still have we still have tons of standard Velcro 7.5 inch twisted wool. That's a heavy marine pad. That's a body shop pad. There's still some detailers using those. Rotary just cuts so fast. Once a guy's not afraid of it, they can go through that cutting step pretty fast with a rotary. I see a lot of guys that have been, only orbital, and then all of a sudden they get pretty skilled on the orbital, and then they're not afraid to try the rotary, and they're like, oh, I only use rotary for the cut on cars, and then they get past that fear factor, and then they go to the orbital for the finish work. I've seen that a lot, but they've got to get past that fear factor. There's been so much fear put into people's minds about rotaries that a lot of guys just, I never use a rotary. I hate rotary. They've never tried it.
Well, I can tell you, all my my boat people out there, we live and die by the rotary. We're all about the rotary gang. For sure. Right. We don't remove oxidation with a dual action polisher. So we got to make sure that we're attacking it with a rotary. Now, don't get me wrong. A DA is a part of our finishing process, but yeah, we're far from afraid of rotaries out there. I can assure you, at least the listening base that's out there. But one other question I have too, that is like pile height. So especially on wool pads, we're going to go back to, the marine guys and gals real quick, or, automotive world too, but you have 1.25, 1.5, and some have 2. So like,
Okay.
what's the difference? Obviously the length of the wool, but is there a difference of when you're using it?
Yeah. So there's a difference. The shorter it is, the more the pile stands up and doesn't fall over, and it gives you a quicker cut. So 1.2, 1.25 inch, that's like a body shop standard usually, because they want to cut real fast. It's pretty aggressive. 1.5 was what all of the detailers were using when the detail pad, when that was the cutting pad for detailers. Marine, they use a lot of 1.5. 2-inch, in my opinion, is a ridiculous product that just was like came about back in the day when people thought more was better. Oh, look how much wool this pad has in it. Okay, let's make it 2 inches long. So it's really, in my opinion, useless. 2-inch. It's just a big blob of wool. Doesn't really do anything because it lays down. It's like a big mop. It doesn't stand up. You want the end of the wool on the buffing surface. You don't want it falling down. So that's why if it's tightly packed and dense pile, it stays up. And if it's short, it stays up. So if it's long, it falls over. And if it's loosely packed, it falls over. So long and loosely packed, though, isn't a bad thing for a finishing pad. Like if you had a softer wool, you don't want it to be too aggressive. You want it to be a little bit longer. Usually finishing pads in wool that are tufted, they're 1.5 inches and a little bit softer wool. So the wool lays down. So, but
Yeah.
if you talk to a guy that does body shop work and he's cutting sanding scratches, and if he gets 1.25 or 1.5 inches, there's a time difference in the cut.
And it's faster with the 1.25 inch.
Yeah, a guy who knows, he'll see it. He's like, wow, this is working better. So body shops like it. So, for you, 1.25 inches will show a quicker cut, but the pad won't last as long, if you're doing a huge boat. So that's basically the difference.
Nice. And then, we got yellow wool too. We're a big fan of that. So, this is essentially more of a polishing pad, right? I mean,
Yes.
What's the difference though in the wool?
You just got, wool. When you look at wool, like under a microscope, there's different diameters of the hair. So there's like a range of wool that's good for cutting. It's a little bit coarser. And there's a range of wool that's good for finishing. It's a little bit finer. So it's skinnier hair, softer. So the yellow one's just got softer wool, and it's got acrylic in it that gives it a nice softness and fills up the pad, makes it bloom up nice, so that it gives you a thicker pad. When you get into the finer grades of wool, the hair is kind of limp, and the acrylic helps it like bloom up and feel full. So when you put your hand in the pile, you feel like, oh, I've got some meat here to buff with, instead of just like a flat hair. So it's just a way to help the pad look better, and it keeps it soft.
Nice. Yeah. I would tell you, like, for the marine detailers out there, like, this yellow wool step is overlooked and will definitely separate, those that are good to great, man. I mean, it's a definite game changer when you move to like your yellow wool step right behind your white wool step. I mean, the amount of gloss and correction that you get in the short term, sometimes I tell some of those marine detailers out there that are against doing a 3-step, right? Because a lot of times we're all about like trying to save time, and some will just go to, their white wool step and then go straight to their DA finishing step, where essentially a lot of times you could do 3 steps faster or in the same time that you could do the 2, because, this yellow wool step's going to cut down those, fine or those heavy scratches from your heavy cut and really make it a lot smaller, where your finishing stage with your DA stage is just a quick buzz, what I mean? And versus you're taking your second stage and blowing out your pads, like we talked about, and put some extra pressure, really trying to dig out your heavy cut stage. So again, like, I mean, Rich, like the pads that you guys make for us, we, for the industry as a whole, we really appreciate you guys as well as your partners. I mean, I know you have a good relationship with those at Lake Country and Rupes. Like, I think that's where the marine space as a whole is, and even the automotive space, we all kind of stick together, as even if we're competitor brands, like we all kind of look out for each other and trying to help each other out. And like, again, I want to thank you guys for like making our job out there easier and more efficient. And I know that you, especially your son, like I believe Riley works for you as well. I mean, you guys and the rest of your team, is it the woman behind, or what's the young lady that's
Mona?
Mona? Y'all are out there working hard every single day to make sure that not only you're delivering the right product, it's going out the door to the highest standard that you guys can deliver, man. Like with that, like where do you see potential pad development going in the next 5 years? Do you see some crazy stuff coming out, or what do you see in the next 5 years for Buff and Prime?
I mean, we're always improving products, we're always trying to make things better, always in communication with customers to find out, how products are working, what could be improved, because, you learn it from the field. The products that are out there, where are the flaws, what are the things that people have problems with. So sometimes when you may not have an idea for a new product, if you just look around and talk to customers, you find a new one, and then you capitalize on it, and you never know where it can come from. It can come from the weirdest places, and you get good ideas. I mean, I'm a thinker. I'm always thinking about how to improve products. I think like we talked about the foam strength and things like that. I mean, we're always pushing suppliers to build better foam. I think I think things like that will be improving in the future.
Right.
I think technology is getting better and better every day. So like one of the things that I had access to when I first started, it's just so different today. It always gets better. So, a company like ours that's looking to improve all the time. I mean, as things develop, we'll have new products. But I mean, we have so many. We probably have 1,000 part numbers that we make, because we make products for all different industries and different size machines and things that are not even in our catalog, not on our website, custom, private branded. So there's so many products already.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm always trying to make them better, and always looking for new ideas. So things develop all the time. But I'd say a lot of the products that are out there now are really good. I mean, the market's pretty crowded. You've really got to pay attention to come up with new stuff that makes sense, that works. The newest product we have is that Edge Guard product, which is doing quite well with guys, because it centers the pad and protects the edge, and it also keeps the foam from ripping, because when guys pull their foam pad off the backing plate, it tears under the foam edge.
Yes, we didn't talk about that much, but we do need to talk about that before we end this. Is like, so continue on that, but when you're done, like, do want to ask you, like, what do you feel the proper way of removing your pad off the DA is? And when?
Well, when you go to pull the pad off, the only place a regular pad is to pull on the foam. So with you put a pad on and the machine's running and you're pushing down, and the twisting action of the backing plate is stressing the first 1/4 inch of foam under the Velcro. So the more you run the pad, the more stress you're putting in that area. Then you want to take the pad off. You pull the pad off. You have to grab by the foam. Then the foam may or may not rip under the Velcro. But if you ask detailers, where does the pad go first? When you get a new pad, you put it on, what falls apart first? And you ask them, does it start tearing under the Velcro? A lot of them say, yeah, that's where it goes first. And they actually create the rip because they're pull the pad off. Yeah. So with the Edge Guard plastic cup that's on there, it's melted into the backing. So when you go to pull the pad off, you no longer have to pull in the foam, you pull in the cup. So then you take away that ripping point. You change the stress, you change the construction of the pad, so that stress isn't there anymore. Then that shell centers the backing plate, which with foam pads, if you don't center a foam pad perfect, it's not going to shake. Yeah. But what I see guys do is I see them put the backing plate on put the pad on the backing plate, and it's not centered. Some of the backing plate's hanging off the edge. I've seen guys do that and they don't pay attention, and then that's dangerous, especially on cars. I mean, boats are a little more forgiving probably than a car, but you can hit something with it. So, so that's a benefit of it. The center of the pad is open like a regular foam pad. So the plastic is only on the edge of the pad, and that lets the pad breathe, because traditionally, like the curved wool pads like that you have there that go on rotary, the plastic's all the way across the center of the pad. So when a guy looks at our Edge Guard, he might think, oh, that thing's all sealed up across the back with plastic, but it's not. So it lets the airflow through the center, which is really important on an orbital pad.
Yeah.
and then having that shell curved up, it protects the edge from banging anything, which happens. I mean, even if you're a really good detailer, some guys will say, I never do that. But, when you're lifting a machine all day long and you're getting tired and, you can make a mistake and it can cost you money. I've talked to detailers that have, I had to paint a car because I hit something. Or I have employees buffing. I got 6 guys buffing in my shop and they don't care if they hit something.
Yeah.
So they feel a little comfort out of it. The other thing that plastic shell does too is, is when you press down, you're getting even pressure on the foam all the way around, because that's like a protective barrier. With a regular pad, if you press down and after a prolonged use, you pull the pad off, you have a footprint in your pad of your backing plate. So with that plastic liner, you don't get that anymore. So the pad looks better longer. So it doesn't wear the pad out. So that was a project that I was trying to improve on orbital foam pads. And I'm like, well, what can I do to make it better? Because everybody's got a flat pad. Everybody's got this edge bevel, there's nothing, no benefits that you can offer someone. So it took me about 2 years to develop that. I built all the machines for it. And, we've had it out for a little while. It's doing well. We have it in a 3, a 5, and a 6. And considering doing it in wool and microfiber at some point.
Oh, that'd be cool. I know that the experience that I have of been using those is that they're awesome, man. For sure. Like you said, easily to center. You kind of eliminated a lot of that pulling off the Velcro such, which, again, I think a lot of times we're talking about overheating pads and then people are, that pad's hot and they're trying to pull it off. And that's why it pulls that, that Velcro backing. I think something that like Rupes did really well is the claw. I love the Rupes claw to the effect of where, you can really take that claw and slide it in between the pad itself instead of kind of like pulling up and potentially kind of use it, slide it in and pull it up to prevent damaging that Velcro versus just kind of pulling up on it. So
right.
I mean, I said it before, you guys, Rupes, Lake Country, you guys are all working really hard to, develop and innovate into the game. And we really appreciate, y'all doing that for us, man. Like really from the bottom of our heart. We look forward to seeing the cool stuff that, Buff and Shine has in store here. Again, like Rich, man, I appreciate you coming on and spending time with us. And like those of you out there that are listening, like you can find Buff and Shine pads at all of our marine detail supply locations across nationwide, as well as marinedetailsupply.com, Marine Detail Supply, Tampa Bay, Port Clinton, Fort Lauderdale, Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, we keep adding them left and right. We got Stewart, Riviera Beach. We have another one coming, Rich, and I'm going to wait for that announcement officially because I'm going to have them on the podcast here. But again, Rich, I appreciate you being on, and thank you again, man.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. See ya.